hopefully this will improve my speaking voice. I'm working on that. Okay, so this will allow us to just, like when we do the demo, I can just, keep moving. And then for those who need to come back, they can do that. Because I want to try and finish by 11 today. So, all right, so today we're going to be talking about collection views and what is a UI collection view. So first of all, it's a view. That's the first thing to know, right? So it's just a view. Obviously a complex view. So it's a way to present ordered data with a flexible layout. So grid layout is the most common, and it's very commonly used view, right, for presenting I guess table-like data. So here's an example from the old old school Photos app. I don't think it looks like this anymore. You can see that these are views all in a stack, and they're kind of like tilted and so on to give the indication that they're a stack and that you can pinch to expand them. So that's possible using a custom layout. And Apple's calendar is also a UI view, UI collection view rather. So you can actually there are like tutorials online where you can kind of create this sort of thing. And here's Pinterest. So you can see that this is also a collection view, and the cells here are sort of staggered. And so this is using a custom layout. Okay, so the 50,000 foot view here is that you have these different elements. So it's very, very similar to table view. So we have the view itself, which is right here. And then that view obviously controls cells, so individual cells. And then, so the main difference with the collection view is that they've abstracted out the layout. So that's like its own object. So that's on this side here. But on this side, you can see that we have the basic abstraction here of using a data source as a separate object. So that's like the model object. And the delegate. So basically, like a data source just is a delegate. It's just called data source to make it clear that its job is to serve up data. And the UI collection view delegate, its job is to respond to events. So you might not need to respond to events, and then you don't need to implement any delegate methods, but you'll always use the data source methods. And so the layout is, by default, it comes with this UI collection view flow layout, and and this subclass is UI collection view layout. So you can create a completely custom layout if you want, in which case you would just subclass UI collection view layout, or you can subclass the UI collection view flow layout if you want to just adapt their layout and customize it. You can do that as well. But for most layouts, most common layouts like grid layouts, that kind of thing, you'll probably just be interacting with the flow layout. So I'm mostly going to be talking about flow layout today, and tomorrow they're going to be, I guess, getting more into layout stuff. So the thing that I would say is that the layout object is fairly advanced. So if you don't understand frames and bounds and stuff like that, it kind of presupposes knowledge of that. And it is a kind of delegate, so it's like calling that object whenever it needs information. So it's also presupposes kind of a solid understanding of delegation. So what I would say is, like, if you're not getting the layout stuff, don't freak out, don't worry about it. It's pretty advanced, and so yeah, just be forewarned that you might need to come back to it at some point if you don't get it. Okay, so what it looks like, so we have cells here. So this is the old school iBooks. No, it's the old school. I think it's the old school Photos app, I believe. So this is using in the bad old days of schemorphism where they made it look like a bookshelf. So we have the cells, and then we have these supplementary views, which are these, you can see it's pointing to this label here. So the supplementary views are similar to cells, but they are used for like headers and footers and that kind of thing. And they can obviously take dynamic data, so they are also plugged into data source, and we'll look at that in the demo today. The decoration view, so these supplementary views, they don't respond to touch events. So I don't know, maybe you can hook maybe you could hook some kind of, you could maybe hook your own touch event up. But most of the time people aren't going to be like tapping them and expecting interaction with the headers and footers. And the decoration view is this sort of fixed background view, and it also doesn't respond to touch events. And yeah, with the custom layout stuff, you can obviously size these whatever way you want and design them whatever way you want. So there's like a huge amount of room to maneuver here. So really, like, the collection view was a response by Apple to the limitations of the table view controller, or the UI table view. And there was sort of a famous app back in the day called Parse. I don't know if anyone remembers that app, but it was a newsreader app, and it was a bunch of Stanford University students who built this app. It was actually 2 students who built the app. And if you go on YouTube, you can see they actually were invited, I think, to the Stanford U iOS course to give a talk about their experience. So if you're interested in that, it's a pretty interesting story. They couldn't get into the iOS course, so they hung out at a cafe and built this newsreader app because they were obsessed with news. And eventually the app did sell to LinkedIn. So that's the basis of LinkedIn's newsreader app, which kind of sucks now. Pulse, sorry. Yeah, I said Purse. Yeah, I meant Pulse. Anyway, but the thing about Pulse was that what they were doing was they had these tables, and then they had these other rows in the tables that, you could scroll. So it was like similar to, I think someone posted something on LinkedIn or on Slack the other day with an example of like a table view with a collection view inside. So it was kind of similar to that, where it had cells inside, and basically what they were doing was putting like a table view inside the cell of another table view and then turning it on its side. And that was the design. And anyway, it won a design award. I think Apple gave it a design award, and a lot of people were emulating this thing. So there were like all these tutorials. People were trying to get this thing to work, and it was a mess. So eventually they came out with this collection view as an answer to that, giving flexibility for the layout. But really, it's kind of a table view with a flexible layout. So the collection view container holds everything. The cells are the content.
Sorry, one question.
Yeah.
For that app, when there was a question on, like in one of the readings, like how to make a table view horizontal.
How to make
Is that what Pulse did? They just put a transform on the table view?
I think so, yeah. I think they did. They transformed, or they turned the table view sideways so that the cells were
like
going this way.
Table view?
Yeah.
Which is, okay.
So it was a straight table view, and then they turned another one sideways and put it inside the cell. I think that's how they did it, yeah. I'm sure there's still tutorials out there if you look it up. Okay, so the cells are the content, and they have these 3 layers. So they have the content view, selected background view, and the background view. And basically, if you need to show that something is selected, then you need to basically add a UI view to the selected background view. So you could give that thing a color or whatever, and that's how you do that. So a lot of the stuff that's built into table view you don't get here for free. You need to do a bit more work. So if you want to move cells around, things like that, you have to do a bit more work. But there was a recent update to, I think that iOS 10 added the ability to move cells out of the box. So if you're trying to do that, make sure you check for the latest stuff. And because there are like a lot of tutorials out there are outdated on this, and they'll take you through a very convoluted process that you don't no longer need to do. So always try and find the latest information to see if something's been updated. So supplementary views are things like headers and footers, and decoration views the background image in this case. So, UI collection view data source. So this is the same as the data source on the table view. So we'll be looking at this today. So basically, the collection view itself is going to call, self.dataSource. It's going to ask for the number of initially when view did load fires. Once this thing is up and running, it's going to ask for the number of sections, right? And then it's going to ask for the number of items in section. And then, so it needs to essentially compute the size of the scroll view, right? So that's what's kind of happening when this thing initializes, is it needs to know how big to make the scroll view. So that stuff kind of fires pretty early on in the life cycle of this thing. And then what happens is, as you scroll in the visible area of the screen, it's going to ask for cells for the visible area of the screen. And it's going to recycle cells, but obviously the data that you provide is going to be added as you scroll. So the data will be unique, but they're going to be recycling the cells. So they only make enough cells to fit in to the visible area of the screen, and then those get added to a reuse pool, and they're basically recycling them, so they don't need to keep initializing these things. All right, so let's see. So data source, so it has 3 required methods: number of sections in collection view, right, and number of items in section. So the number of sections, so that's pretty straightforward. You just give it the number of sections. So if you, we'll see about how to structure our models so that we can structure it properly so that it can answer these questions. Like that's one of the things that you're going to want to bear in mind. And number of sections, or number of items in section, and it passes you the parameter of the section. So if you think of that, so it's going to be like, when it initializes, it's calling this in the loop. So it's going to say, okay, section 0, how many items? Section 1, how many items? Section 2. So however many sections you said you needed, it's going to call this that number of times. And each time it calls you, it's going to call you with the section parameter with that integer value, right? So then you're going to ask your model, okay, at section 0, what's the count of the data at that section? So that it's trying to compute the size of the scroll view. That's the content size of the scroll view. And cell for item and index path, this is a method where the model and the view are brought together in this method. So this is kind of the key method. So you're passed an index path, and the index path consists of the section number and the row. So the index path will say, okay, I'm in this section, like I'm in section 0, and I need a piece of data for row 2. So then you need to reach into the model, grab that data, and assign this data to the cell. And you can see that this returns a UI collection view cell. So it's returning it as the superclass. So it's casting it to the superclass. So you should never change this cast here. Sometimes I've seen people cast it to the subclass here. Don't do that.
Cast to your own subclass?
Yeah, it'll work, but don't do that. There's a reason why it's casting it to the superclass here. Just never change these built-in methods. Although obviously, like these parameters, like it's not going to care because that's just an internal parameter name, so it doesn't care.
So when you're referring to your own cell, like
well, internally, like when you dequeue it, you've got to cast it to your subclass. So we'll look at that.
Just like the demo, the return type of the.
But don't change the return type here on the signature, right? Like you could change this to your own subclass, and it would work. But don't do that. Just leave it as the superclass.
So when you're using your dequeue call
Yeah.
to to get an instance.
So when
of
you're
the
de-
cell, did you have to cast it back?
So when you're dequeuing, you must cast it to your own subclass if you want to send it data, because it won't know about any data you set on that thing. Anything that you've done to customize that cell, it's not going to know about that unless you cast it to the subclass.
Right.
Right. So,
But
but
then
when
after
you return
sell-
it, you're returning it as the superclass. Right. So there's no need to remember so that's upcasting, and upcasting is free. You don't need to cast to the upcast.
Okay.
It knows that it's a subclass of that thing.
Subclass.
It's just going to return it as the subclass. But internally, it's just consuming that thing from the point of view of its superclass. It doesn't care about any of the custom stuff you've done to it, right? When internally, once it's consuming that thing, it's only consuming it on the basis of the superclass's API, not your subclass.
So you can just return the cell as normal, but it just knows that it's a subclass of UI CollectionView cell?
Well, the collection view itself internally, it's going to consume the cell internally, but it only needs to interact with the superclass's API, not your subclass.
Right.
So whatever you did to it here, it's just going to take that cell, and then the stuff it's doing internally, it only needs to interact with it on the basis of its superclass. Yeah, I've sometimes seen people, subcast this right here to the subclass, but don't do that. Okay, so UI CollectionView delegate. So this is about interaction, so user interaction. So one of the main things that we'll use this for is to interact with cells being touched if we're not kind of dragging from a cell to do a segue. Did you guys, have you guys seen that yet with the table view?
Wait, what exactly?
So did select row in table view? Did you guys see that method yet?
I think we did that yesterday.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Reviewed it.
So in the demo, we'll see whether whatever. We'll see how we segue over there. There's many different ways to do it. Okay, so here's the did select item at index path. So collection view. So just to review again, remember that the convention in the delegation pattern in iOS is always to pass a reference to the delegator in the first parameter. So that's why we always see this collection view UI collection view star collection view, unless there isn't a parameter, or sorry, if there's only one parameter, right? Then it will include something about that collection view in the first. So I guess that's the whole thing. It can never only have one parameter, right? Because it always has to pass the collection view. So if so it would at least have to have a reference to the collection view in that first parameter. So there aren't methods without a first parameter. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so this passes a reference to the caller, and the reason that they do that is because maybe you have more than one collection view. And so you don't want to have to track that, which collection view is trying to reach out for the data. You would just know automatically because you have a reference. It's passing itself in. So this is the did select item. And this, I don't know, this can be confusing at first when you're starting. Is that why are all these methods called, table view UI table view star table view? What is that, And so now you know that it's always just passing in the caller of this delegate method. So it's the delegator. Okay, so UI CollectionView flow layout. So this subclass is UI CollectionView Layout and is used most for grid style layouts. The default flow layout is automatically hooked up in the UICollectionViewController and can be accessed using the property CollectionView Layout. Okay, so we'll look at this. So this is kind of something that you see often is that people will try and initialize one and when they're using the storyboard, but it's already there in the storyboard, and you just need to get a reference to it using this property. So we'll look at this. So what is the difference between a collection view added as a subview in a UI view controller and a UI collection view controller? So this is a question.
You've got the data source and delegates already implemented.
Okay, so they're already connected. If you drag out a UI collection view controller into the storyboard, the data source and delegate are already connected.
And your outlet is already built in.
Right, so the outlet to the collection view is already connected. So that means if you drag a collection view into a view controller, your job is to connect those three things up, right? You need to connect the outlet to the collection view and the outlets to the data source and delegate. Right. What else? So what's the difference? So a couple other things. Do you want someone want to take a stab at?
Does it inherit like layout properties, like collection view?
No, the layout is not affected. So a couple other things is the controller is going to be a different class, right? So in the case of a UI collection view controller, so if you drag out a UI collection view controller, the controller must be a subclass of UI collection view controller. And if you drag out a collection view into a UI view controller, the controller is a subclass of UI view controller. So make sure you understand what I'm saying there, because you don't want to mess that up. Especially I'm thinking of the test, but we're not going to be doing a test on the collection view, but it'll be a related problem in the table view, and that can come up. So make sure you understand what I'm saying.
Can you repeat that one more time?
So we'll remind me when we come to the demo, and I'll show you in the demo what I mean, okay? Because it's better than me kind of waving my arms around. So let's come back to this. Just please remind me when I get to the demo. Okay, so there's another thing where there's a difference, and that is that, and this is kind of the fundamental difference, is that in a collection view, in a UI view controller, the root view is self.view, which is a UI view. Okay, so it is a UI view, and that means that that's the root view. So you can have subviews of self.view. If you make a UI collection view controller, the root view is a collection view. It's a UI collection view. So that's a root view. So you cannot have subviews in that view controller. So it can only be a collection view. So that's a really big difference. The thing is, if you make something a UI collection view controller, then you should be really certain that you're not going to add like a subview later. So almost, I think it's probably a bad idea to use the UI collection view controllers. Just a convenience, but it limits you to adapt to change in the app. So yeah, if you're writing your own app, I would avoid either the UI table view controller, UI table view controller, and UI collection view controller. I would personally avoid them. It just limits you, and you don't get much for your hassles.
Can you explain that one more time?
So
if you add a UI collection view to a view controller,
yeah,
that's beneficial. Why?
Because it allows you to add subviews.
Okay.
Whereas, so I could have a collection view and a table view on the same view controller.
Gotcha.
Whereas or I could have a collection view and I could have a UI view with some, art or something in it, or an image view or something like that. Whereas if the root view is a UI collection view or a UI table view, if that's the root view, I can't sort of drag that thing, resize it, and add another sub view. So that's really like the kind of fundamental limitation and really the fundamental difference.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll drag this out in the storyboard and we'll look at this in a sec. Okay, so if you have an outlet to a UI collection view, then you can also access the CollectionView Layout. So I've already said this. It's just a property. So if you have an outlet to the UI collection view, then you have an outlet. You have access to its layout object. And if it's connect, if it's created in storyboard, it's automatically going to be a flow layout unless you set a custom class to that thing. So you can set up static values for the flow layout in storyboard. So tip static default flow layout values set in storyboard may affect your layout and give you results you aren't expecting. So we'll look at this in a sec as well, which is basically like you can set stuff up in storyboard. Like you'll get a little view that will show you, the static values that you set on that collection view scene. So basically the point is that if you don't override a value in code and you set it in the storyboard statically, that value will prevail on your layout. And so that's why, like out of the box, you'll often, because there are some default values usually set, and then when you kind of initialize this thing, you get like some weird layout and you don't know what's going on. Usually it's because something's set statically in the storyboard that you didn't override, and then you're getting some weird values. So we'll look at this. So the storyboard is a good place to look to see what properties the layout has, and you can experiment. I'll demo this. So why generally your static values in the storyboard are almost entirely useless. And why is this? So the layout values, like for instance, if I say I want my item size to be 50 by 50. So this is almost always a bad idea. And why is that?
Rotation, when you switch.
Okay,
Screen size.
that could be a problem, yeah. What else? So static values don't respond to device size, right? So that means that your layout is not responsive to the device size you're on. So that's you almost never want that, right? You want your layout to be responsive to the device size you're on. So you're rarely going to do a layout totally in storyboard. So you almost want to make your layout relative to the view's dimensions, and you can use viewDidLoad. All right, so is that clear? Well, when I demo this, it'll become clear. So just okay. So flow layout. One of the things that we have here is we have the scroll direction. So if we have a vertical scroll direction, so we can set the scroll direction. So you can see that here I'm getting a reference to the flow layout. So notice self.collectionView, which is an outlet to the collection view. And I'm doing .CollectionViewLayout. So that's a property that's built into the collection view itself. I'm just grabbing a reference to that. But I need to cast it to the subtype that I'm talking to in order to get the scroll direction property. So I'm downcasting here to the flow layout. And then there's a value on it that where I can set the scroll direction. And basically in the flow layout, so how this wraps depends on the scroll direction, right? So I've got I have a fixed, width. I have some sort of fixed width that when these cells kind of reach the end, they're going to wrap to the next line. So that's kind of how that works. And if the scroll direction is, so this is a vertical scroll direction. If the scroll direction is horizontal, then it's going to wrap. It's going to wrap on the other axis. So some properties. So there's minimum inter-item spacing and minimum line spacing, and scroll direction. So these are kind of typical ones that you're going to want to look at. So here I'm just showing how I would set the minimum line spacing programmatically. So this would be like in viewDidLoad or something. I would get a reference to the layout, CollectionView Layout property, and I'm casting it. to a UI collection view flow layout, and then I can set the minimum line spacing programmatically like this. I can also do this in Storyboard. So things like minimum line spacing, you could set that in Storyboard. That's reasonable because it's probably going to, unless it's a computed value, that depends on the size of the screen. Okay, so here's some. So here's setting the minimum line spacing. So that basically determines. So you can see the little blue arrow here. The black arrow is the actual line spacing, and the minimum line spacing is the blue arrow. So it won't get smaller than the blue arrow, that's all it's saying. And similarly with the minimum, so this is the inter-item spacing, and this is the minimum line spacing, so that's the value between the lines. So it's pretty straightforward. So the collection view, it has this UI, it has an inset value from the header. So you can see that it is, yeah, so this is the content inset. So just like any scroll view, we can inset its value, and it uses this special initializer UI edge inset make. And you can see that it has a top, left, bottom, and right values. So you need to provide the values, and this is showing, like, obviously what it's doing. So these are section insets. So that's how that looks. So the collection view flow layout has a delegate, and this allows you to dynamically size cells. So you can see here CollectionView Layout, and then this is size for item at index path. So this is going to call you with an index path, and it's going to ask you for the size of that item. So this might be like if you have data and you need to make the size of the item relative to the amount of data you have, this would be how you would do this, right? So it's going to call you. When it's at that index path. So as you're scrolling, and your collection view needs information for the upcoming cells, it's going to call you with this method with the index path, and basically what you would return is a CG size for that cell. So somehow the model would have to compute this, or you would have to have some sort of layout object or something where you would have, let's say, an array of sizes that you could return when it was at that index path. So you don't need to do this if your cell sizes are always going to be the same. Then you can set those at the beginning of the life cycle, and you don't need to respond to these delegate methods. So this allows kind of like a fairly kind of flexible layout within the flow layout itself, just by using delegation. So you can see here that just as any delegate, this thing could call these flow layout delegate methods and ask for coordinates that it needs. So UICollectionView Layout, so this is the superclass, and you can subclass this thing and totally hand roll your layout object, and this allows like crazy layouts. The thing is that basically this is obviously going to involve a lot of geometry and stuff, so if you are not comfortable with that, you can always find, like, most layouts have been solved. So there's a lot of libraries out there. You can just grab the code and work with it. So you don't necessarily need to roll your own, but it's probably good practice to at least create some kind of simple custom layout at some point to get some practice. All right. So where are we at? We're at 10 o'clock. So why don't we take 5 minutes so that, because once I start coding, I'm never going to stop. So.
Sounds good. Anytime you're doing that stuff, internal.
Okay, so a couple things. Has everyone got the project open? Yeah. Yes. Try to code along if you can.
The single view application, right?
This is a single view application. So I've set up some stuff here so that we can get going. So let me just look at a couple things before we start coding. So what we can see here is that we have a navigation controller, and we have this other, which is just a view controller. So let me open this navigator, the document outline. So you can see that this is actually a view controller, and the reason that you know is because it has a view that is a UI view. So let me just show you here this point that I was making earlier about adding a collection view controller. So if we look in the in this object panel over here, we can see this collection view controller. So if I drag this thing out, you can see that in the document outline, you can see that the root view is a collection view. So that's how you know that is a collection view controller. And this thing, when you want to create a class to control this thing, you want to make sure that class is a UICollectionViewController subclass. So if we create an object here, we want to make sure that this is a UICollectionViewController and not a UI view controller. So that's going to be what controls this object if it is. So I'll just go ahead and create it. You can see that they give you all this kind of starter code in here.
You want us to create
Don't bother creating it. We're not going to use it. So here you can see that I would need to set this class to this collection view controller. So the second way of doing this is to just drag out a view controller, which is what we have up here. So we just have a view controller. And then what you can do is drag out a, you need to find it first, collection view. So you're just going to drag out the collection view. Oops. Come on. Right, so you can see that this allows me to have the collection view. So you can see in the document outline over here, you can see that the collection view is a subclass, is a subview of this UI view, the root view.
Yeah.
Okay, and that also allows me to add, like, let's say I wanted another view in here. I could add that, or I could add a table view if I wanted. Okay, so I can add a table view or a view, and there's a collection view. So these are all within this one view because they can be sub-views of the root view self.view. But if I go and try and add a UI view to this guy, it won't let me. Okay.
So in the example that
I don't know where it's put it, but
in the example we did yesterday where we used that master detail, that's doing the way that you're saying we should not do it, right? Like that gives you a subclass. Is
well,
subclass
that was a
UI.
split view controller.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's different. That's
No,
out
it
of
was
the
a
box. Was it a split view
it was
controller out of the
it was a
box?
master detail with no split view controller. That was somebody from 4 made the template and we downloaded it.
Oh, I see. But it wasn't using the split view controller, or it was?
It was not.
Oh, yeah. So generally, yeah, you want to avoid using the UI collection view controller. I mean, it's just there for people who can't figure out how to connect up a data source delegate and an outlet.
Yeah.
So it's just a convenience. It's like, but I think personally, I think that it confuses newcomers, and so that's why I often see this confusion. So that's why I'm mentioning it.
Yeah, the template was a subclass of UI table view controller.
Yeah, so the template is, in that template, we couldn't make the view controller smaller and add something else under it.
Right.
It's like, it only does that.
Yeah.
It's like, it
So-
will only be a view controller, or a table view controller.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I don't mess around with the templates. I don't usually customize them, but you can. But but yeah, I would generally avoid the UI table view controller. There's very little advantage there.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be some other thing with the way it shows the scroll view or indicator or something. I don't know. There may be a couple of other differences. So, but you almost never need them. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Generally, though, what my advice is to prefer a UI view controller subclass and add the views as subclasses. So prefer that technique unless you have some, prevailing reason to trump that. I would just prefer that. Okay, so right now we're getting some warnings, and what are they? So this, so we're getting a warning because this view controller here is not reachable, and that's because there's no segue to it. And what's the other reason we would be getting this? So there's no segue to it. So how could we solve this warning?
You could either make that the initial view controller, or you could make a segue to it.
Make a segue to it. What? And so what's the third way I could solve it? I talked about this in the lecture on view controllers, so consider this review. Okay, so if I give it a storyboard identifier, then this warning will go away. And that means that, so right now this view controller is not reachable. It's like, it is logically not reachable. That's what the compiler is saying. If I give it a name, then it is reachable. Like I still have to reach it, but it is reachable. So I would have to give this an identifier. So we'll come back to that. Okay, so I'm just going to remove these files. I don't need them. Let me just quickly look at the model. So what I'm going to do here is I'm creating a model, sort of my model to kind of be able to answer questions from the data source easily. And the thing is that this is kind of like really just, in a sense, an exercise that I hope will be instructive. But what you would want to do is actually make the music manager the data source itself, so that all of the data source methods would be in this manager and not in the view controller. But I'm going to do it a little bit different, just to show like how you might call from the manager or from the view controller into the manager. And then maybe if there's time, I'll just make the manager the data source, just so that we see how that's done. So what I have here is I have an app where I want a collection view to show a bunch of artists, and I want them to group them into sections, and I want section headers with the name of those artists. And then when I tap on one, I want to go over and see the artist in this detail view here. So it's a very simple app. So what I've got here is I have a data manager, music manager, which is going to be the point of contact the view controller has with the model. So that's its point of contact. And the manager is going to handle everything from there. So what this thing has is it has an array of musician objects. And we'll look at the musician object. So the musician object has an array of photo objects. So as you'd expect, right? Because they are basically managing like all the photos associated with that artist. And then the name of the artist and an initializer. And you can see that these are read-only properties because nobody needs to kind of reach in. The manager doesn't need to reach in here and change the photo objects. If you had more photos you're going to add, maybe there might be some sort of setter or something on this object, but right now it's read-only. And the name is obviously read-only because once that's set, we're not going to change it. And it has an initializer, and if we look inside the initializer, this is just going to create the photos depending on what name is passed in. So if the name is Taylor Swift, then it's going to create it's going to call this create photos with name and pass in the name Swift. And then it's going to loop through and generate these all these images, or sorry, all these photo objects, right? So the photo object is just has a name and an image, and the initializer, so it has a custom initializer, and it initializes the image with that name. Okay, so if we look at the supporting files, we can see that the images are, I've got them sorted in these folders here, but we can just see that they're just named like Iggy01 and then Lady01 through 6 and Swift01 through 6. Okay, so that's the naming convention that I've adopted, so that allows me to use this sort of way of initializing it, so I don't need to like write each one out. I can do it in a loop. Okay, so is everyone clear? Do we have the music manager? It has a list of musicians, and its job is to initialize each musician object and add them to the musician array. And then when, so it's calling the musician's custom initializer and passing the name of the musician. And then when that thing is called, so its initializer is going to call init with name, and then its job is to create all of the photo objects associated with that particular artist. So there's 3 artists, and each one gets initialized. It's going to call the musician object, which is going to initialize all of the photo objects associated with that. And the leafmost object is this photo object, which basically has a name and an image. The image is read-only, and as I say here, this could have more data on it. Like the photo object itself could have, like, say could have other metadata on it, like location or date or info like that on it. Maybe who the photographer was, let's say, something like that. Okay, is everyone clear on the model? So right now, this isn't really going to help us until we, so we're going to ask the manager. When the data source asks us a question, we're going to ask the manager. So we're delegating to the data source, we're delegating to the music manager, and it's going to basically return the data that we need. All right, so let's just make sure that, so we want to make sure that our class is set on this subclass of this view controller here. So the first thing that we're going to need is a collection view. So UICollectionView. So we're going to just drag this collection view out. Oops. Yeah. All right. So let's have a look around here. If we select the collection view and we look inside this this collection view inside the size inspector, you can see that we're given all these controls here. And so you can play around with these to get an idea of what happens. So that you can see adjusts the width and height, and then we can adjust the footer and header size. Right now it's set to 0. We'll come back to that. So what I can do actually to make this a little bit more interesting is I can add another cell. Okay, I could just add a bunch of cells in here to experiment. So if I want to see how this layout works, so I can, let's say, increase the width. So you can see how the inter-item spacing or minimum line spacing here is set to 10. And we'll see if we make it a little wider, it's gonna, once it reaches the minimum the minimum spacing between items, it will bump it to the next line. So often you'll sort of see this kind of layout here where, and you'll wonder like what's going on. So you can experiment around and see how exactly this layout works.
Does that differ from putting the number of items on the collection view?
Uh,
In the collection view cell?
no, if you set the number of items, sorry, was this the number of cells you mean? So
Yeah,
you can,
is number of items?
yeah, so that will increase the number of items is just the number of prototype cells. So these are prototype cells, obviously so this is using the prototype pattern. Basically what it's saying is that this cell is going to be used as a template for designing your cell. So if you wanted two different styles of cells, you would create basically two different ones and style them whatever way you wanted. And then you would give them different identifiers so that when in cell for row, you would, when you initialize the cell, you would have to like determine which custom cell you were at. Like, let's say maybe if the data were a certain type, you might make it like, I don't know, some different design or something like that. So you could have many different prototype cells, but if they're all going to be the same style, then there would just be one of them, like that. I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, so these are prototype cells. So we're talking about like, initializing a cell of a certain style here. And if we have more than one style, then we would have more than one prototype cell. But I'm just showing like adding a bunch of them just so that we can get an idea of the layout and how these different properties affect the layout so that you can experiment visually and see what it's doing. Okay, so one thing is that we can do is let's just get rid of the line spacing here because we're actually not going to use that. So we can get rid of that. And it doesn't really matter what size the cell is because I'm going to size this I'm going to create a custom size anyway for it.
Sorry, that was the minimum spacing?
Yeah, the two spacing values that were there was in the, I think it was the minimum spacing and the minimum for lines and for cells. So this was the lines is the spaces between the lines and the cells is the space between the cells themselves. So I just zeroed those out because what I want is two cells side by side and I want them to be half the width without any space
How
between.
big's your cell?
Right now, it doesn't matter how big the cell is because we're going to set that in code.
Oh.
Okay, so let's make a custom, while we're here, let's just make a custom cell. So UI collection view cell. So I guess we could give this a name. I guess it's going to be a photo cell. So I'll call it photo cell.
That's a UI collection view control, right?
No, it's a UI collection view cell.
Cells.
Yeah, it needs to be a subclass of a cell. So I'm going to create that. And I'm going to just drag that up here so we can close the model. And what I want to do is just set that cell. The cell here, I want to go to its identity and set this to the photo cell. Okay, so that is being controlled by that custom cell. So also while I'm here, I'm just going to drag out a UI image view. And let's drag that out into this guy. And let's just set some constraints. So let's just make this 0 all the way around. Okay. All right, that looks good. What else do I need to do? Okay, so all right, so let's go in. So MainViewController is where all the action is for our view controller. So we need to start to do some things in here. So let's get the manager happening. So let's import the what did I call it? Musician manager. Musician.
Or did you put the image in the photo cell?
Yeah, I put it inside the. So it's inside the cell. You can see that it's a subview of the cell there. Yeah. Okay, so let's just import. So I'm in MainViewController.m, and I'm going to import the musician manager.h. So we need to initialize this thing. And we could do this anywhere, but the easiest thing is to do it in viewDidLoad. It's early enough, so super viewDidLoad. And I'm going to need a property to the manager, so assign property atomic. music manager, and I'm just going to call it a manager. So self.manager equals music manager. It's musician manager, sorry. Okay, so I've got the music manager. And what we need here is we need to make sure that we are interacting with this collection view. So we need an outlet, and we need to make sure that we are the data source and the delegate. So what I can do here is I can do UI collection view data source. So this is saying that this object conforms to this data source. And I can add it to the private interface because nobody's going to need to know this information from outside. So I just add it to the private interface. And you see automatically I'm getting some warnings because I haven't implemented the required data source methods. So let's not worry about the delegate just now. We'll come back to that. So if I option click here, I need a reference to this collection view. So I'm going to control drag from the collection view and just call it collection view and make sure that it's an outlet. So notice that this is strong and not weak. Most outlets are weak. Why is this one strong?
I guess it's because you have a large collection, and if you made it weak, those would all disappear. Like
Okay.
all the things inside all the cells within the UI collection view probably have a weak reference. And if you had a weak reference to that, then you would just kill everything.
Yes,
There's no strong references in it.
Right. So the idea is that the view controller needs to retain the collection view, and normally you have the collection. The UI view controller normally has a strong outlet or a strong. Well, normally, I guess in this case, because we are subview, we should be able to make this weak, right? Because
I think so.
yeah, we should be able to make this weak because we do have a root view, which is strong, and this is a subview of that. But anyways,
So you just created that yourself?
I control dragged, but it said it would let me make it weak. So I could have made this
Oh, I
weak.
control drag and made it weak.
Yeah. So let's just let's run it and see if it's no. It's probably gonna crash anyway because. All right, so let's just look and see if it is no. Pretty sure it should be okay as a weak. So manager is null, but collection view is not null. So it could be weak in this case. If it were the root view, it would need to be strong. So the reason it can be weak is that the view controller has a strong reference to self.view, and this thing is being this thing. So the view has a strong reference to the collection view because it's a subview. So the root view basically has an array of all of its subviews, or at least its most immediate children, right? So, and those would all have to be strong references. And that's why when you create an outlet to it, and it's a subview, you don't need a strong reference. All right. And I digress. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're seeing here that collection view number of rows and section and so on isn't implemented. So one of the easy things we can do is just command click on the data source, and we jump to the protocol, and we can see the required methods are stated right here. So we can just copy these. Actually, this number of sections, we're going to be implementing that, so let's just copy that as well. Okay, so I don't need this, and let me just clean this up a bit. All right. Okay. So the first thing is that the number of sections, so this is pretty easy. It's just the number of musicians that we have, and the data manager will be able to answer this question. So, sorry, this is the number of items in section. That's not what I meant. I meant this method here, number of sections in CollectionView. Just move this one up. Okay, so I'm just going to do it like this: self dot manager number of sections in CollectionView. So I'm going to get the manager to answer this question. So let's just go to the model. So this is going to return an NS integer. You can just copy that and paste it in here. And this is just going to return self.musician array.
So we're just creating that, we're copying and pasting the whole method name of number of
That's what I'm doing, yeah, for now. So I'm just like, any data source method that's being asked of me, I'm going to ask the manager. And obviously, this is kind of silly because the manager should just directly answer the question. And so we'll fix that at the end.
So that's in musicmanager.m.
This is in musician manager.m. So number of sections in CollectionView.
Sorry, that was
So I've just declared it in the header.
musician array.count. Was it?
Yeah. Self.musicianarray.count. Okay. So the number of musicians corresponds to the number of sections, and the data musician manager has this info. So it can directly answer that question. So we need to return this value. So return. Okay, so now we need to answer the question number of items in section. So we're going to also return return. So self.manager. Oh, sorry. Should be like this. Self.manager number of items in section. Okay, so right now we don't have this method, so let's go over to the manager. And this is going to also return it as integer. And the section is an as integer. So that's the method, right? That the data manager is calling about. Okay, so here I need so I'm going to be called with a section number. So it's going to say section 0. So number of items in section 0, number of items in section. So I've said there are 3 sections, so it's going to call me 3 times. Number of items in section 0, number of items in section 1, number of items in section 2. So how do I implement this?
Sorry, can you hold on for 1 second?
Who knows about this?
I do. I think. That's why.
No, who has the information?
I think
The musician.
You return section count.
I'm sorry?
You return the number, like self.section.count or something?
Okay, so what specifically do I return?
So you're gonna check the manager array.
Yes.
And do its count, and then pass in the section number, right? Or you're gonna check the item that is the section number, and then the count of that.
Okay, so the thing is the data manager only has one piece of data, right? And that's an array of musicians. So it can't do anything except access its array of musicians. So that's got to be where we start.
And then you call count on the photo objects array inside the musician.
That's right, yeah. So I'm passing that call on to the photo,
Can you just go back quickly
to the musician object itself, right? Because the musician object has the count of the photo. It has the count of how many photos that musician has in its photo array. Okay, so the first thing, so remember this guy only has access to the musician array, so self.musician array, and I have to pass the section in there, right? So
This is in the musicmanager.m?
Yeah.
And, okay.
okay, so you see how that's going to give me access to musician 0, musician 1, musician 2, and that thing has, so let's just do it like this. Let's do it in 2 steps, so musician. So this is going to return a musician. This call to this musician array, right? Because it's an array of musician objects, remember? So here, this is an array of musician objects, right? So now I've got the musician object at that index, at that section. So it's either it's either Taylor Swift. If it's 0, it's going to be Taylor Swift. If it's 1, it's going to be Iggy Pop. If it's 2, it's going to be Lady Gaga. Okay, so that's going to give me the musician in question. And that thing, so if I go look at the musician object, that thing only has, it has an array of photo object. It has a photo object array. So that thing has a count on it. So musician, so m dot photo object array dot count. So that's going to give me the count of that. So return that. Okay, so I could do this all in one shot if I wanted, right? Because this is going to be this will give me the photo object array here. So I could do it in one shot. I'm going to leave it like this. So this just makes it clear that the section number that we get called with that parameter, we can grab the musician corresponding to the section in question, and then we can get its photo array count. Okay, so that's, where are we? So here we're a number of sections. So this is supposed to be manager. Okay, so we've done 2 pieces of data source business, and we just have this one data source method left, which is the cell for item at index path. So this is kind of the key method where the model and the view come together inside this method. Okay, so the first thing we know is we're going to be able, we're making a custom cell, so we better import the custom cell. So that's called photo cell, so we'll import that. So this is expecting us to return a UI collection view cell, and ours is a custom version of that. So we need to import that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is try and get a cell that is at this index path. So this index path object is a very simple object. It just has a section number and a row or item. So the thing is in a table view, the other value is a row. In a collection view, it's an item, but they are identical. So it's just that in collection views, because collection views might not be lined up in rows, it might be in a circle or something. So that's why they use the word item, just to be a little bit more idiomatic there. So let's do, so this is a photo cell. So I'll just call this cell. So the thing is that we're gonna have a problem because we didn't give an identifier to the cell, but let's do this like this. So CollectionView. CollectionView. So I'm talking to this parameter here, which is the data source is calling me and it's giving me a reference to itself. So I'm saying, hey, CollectionView, DQ a reusable cell with identifier. So this is going to reach into the reuse pool to see if there is one. And if there is one already made, it'll return that one. If there isn't, it will initialize it. So it needs an identifier. And let's just set that identifier. So we need to select the cell. make sure we select the cell. And we need to set the identifier, the reuse identifier is right there. So just set that to cell. I always just set it to cell. Unless you have more than one prototype cell, you can just make them cell. And if you have more than one, you can say cell 1, cell 2. So that way you never need to look, oh, what did I name my cell today? Right, you always know it's the same. So I'm going to just be lazy and just do this as a literal here. You could make this a static, in which case it would only ever get set once, no matter how many times this method gets called. Okay, so here we just pass in the index path. So this is just boilerplate stuff, and we're saying because we assigned ourselves as the custom cell, this should be able to upcast or downcast it to this custom cell. So it's going to return the correct type. And so what we need now is a piece of data, and this is going to be a photo object. So we better import one of those. We need a photo object. And let's do photo object. PO. So here I need to do I need to talk to the manager. Self.manager. And what I want is, so this is cell for item at index path. So what I want is have a data for item at index path. Index path. So data for item at index path. Let's go implement this method. Okay, so this is going to return. I mean, I guess say, photo object for item at index path. Okay, so I'm going to do an @ class here because this needs to be a photo object. And photo object star photo object. Okay, and the parameter is an NS index path star index path. So index path is a very lightweight object. It's just a wrapper with 2, or I guess it's 3 properties that are integer values. Copy that, and let's go down here. So this is looking for a photo object, and we have an index path. So let's break this out. So let's do ns integer, and let's get the section. So index path dot section. Okay, so we know that we can get the musician using the section. So that's the same as this line right here. Okay, remember we did this, we talked to the musician array with the section number, and that gave us the musician. So what we're looking for is this thing is calling us with the section and the row in the section. So it's going to be like section 0. We need the first item. We need the 0th item in section 0. Okay, give us that data. Or it's section 1. We need the 5th item in section 1. So it's going to keep calling us with the request for data. And so we're using the section number from the index path. We can get the musician, and then we can obviously get the photo object corresponding to this. So let's do an NS integer. So let's do item. So index path dot item. So I'm just breaking this out into separate lines so that you can see that now we have the item or row. And so we can ask the musician for its photo object. So, so photo object is, so we want the musician dot photo object array, and then we want to pass in the item number here. And then we can return photo object like that. Okay, is that clear what I'm doing there? So index path has together the section and row, So it's like as I'm scrolling, if currently visible is section 2, and like section 2, let's say, is coming onto the screen, and the first row is going to be section. So section 2 would be section 1 using the index value starting at 0. So it'd be section 1, and it's going to say, hey, give me the data for the item at section 1, item 0. And then it's going to call again and say, section 1, item 1, section 1, item 2, section 1, item 3, however many it needs.
So
It's going to keep calling as we scroll around. It's going to keep asking for this data, right?
So that NS integer item equals index path is not, and that's getting you already have the section, and then it's going and getting the item out, right?
Right. So from the index path, I can get the section value, and that's going to give me the musician object, which is the manager has an array of those. So it's going to give me whatever corresponding object, and then the item is going to be the photo object that the musician has. So it's going to be one of its items. So that's how I'm modeling it, expecting that it's going to be requesting data in this way. But the thing is this is just using the manager pattern anyway, right? That we've been using all along. So it's like from day one, we kind of have been building to modeling our data in this way, because this is often the way that data is organized by, one object kind of manages a collection of objects, and then that each item in that collection itself could have another array that's managing a bunch of objects and so on. It can keep going like that. Okay, so so the item and then self.photo array, and so I can ask for that item and then I get that. Ultimately, I'm trying to get a photo object. Okay, so let's just go back to where we were. So now I have that photo object. So now I need to talk to the cell and get the cell to handle that photo object, right? So that's a little bit of a problem because we haven't set that up yet. So let's go back to storyboard, and we need to create an outlet to this image view inside the custom cell. Okay, so that's the cell, and that's the image view. So this is inside the implementation of the cell. So I'm just going to create a private interface. So photo cell, like so. Assign interface. Oh yeah, the brackets, sorry. Right. Okay, so let's just control drag, and I'm just going to call this image view. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I need to send this data, so I'm going to, I could have made the photo outlet in the interface and just like right from cell for row, have reached into the cell and set that thing. So that's a possibility, but not best practice. So what I'm going to do is send it the data and then set the outlet once the data arrives. So @sign class, this is going to be a photo object, and let me just import photo object.h.
Sorry,
Okay, so I'm just bringing in the photo object because this thing is going to be displaying the image inside the photo object.
right. And then what'd you do?
I imported it there. So always, whenever I do an @sign class, I go right over and import right away so that I don't have to deal with an error. Okay, so now what I want to do, because I wanted to make a property here, which is going to be non-atomic, and this is going to be a photo object, and then what I want to do is I want to override the setter so that when this thing gets set, I'm going to set the outlet on it. So this is like an observer that's waiting for the data to be set, and then it's going to interact with the outlet. So set photo object, you can see, sorry about that. Set photo object is right there. So photo object equals photo object, and then when this thing is called, so that that's what was happening anyway in the setter, so I'm just making sure that that's implemented. It probably doesn't really matter in this case, but anyway, self.imageview.image equals photo object dot image. So photo object has the image in question, and this is going to override it. Okay, so you see how I'm using the setter override there to intercept this. In Swift, you would use did set, the did set to observer. So it's the same idea.
What did you add in your .h, just a photo object?
Yeah, just photo object as a property.
Sorry, what's this override doing?
So when the self or row calls this and sets the value, right? Then this thing will, in the setter, it's going to grab the incoming value and set it to the outlet, right? So I could have made
So you don't need to do that in the self or item at index path.
So the self or item is just going to pass the value over to the cell, and the cell is going to set it on its own outlet, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, you could, in this case, it's legal, it's not going to crash or anything, have just made an outlet to the image view and just reached into the cell and set the value right there. You could have done it that way too. But that's generally not best practice. Like, right, get in the habit of just sending the whole data object over, right? So remember when we did the weather app and you had to pass the data, and you passed that whole model object, and then when you went over to the detail view, you passed the same model object on, right? And you let that model object decide on what it was going to grab out of there. So by creating a dependency between self or row and certain outlets, when you make changes, you're going to be making changes in more places than you need to, right? Whereas if you just send the data object in and you need to make changes on the cell, you can just limit those changes to the cell. It's not going to also break the view controller in the process. So it's just best practice. In a small app, doesn't matter, but when you start building bigger apps,
When is the set photo object being called?
it's being called when we set it, which we have to come there right now, next.
It's the setter function. It's self.photoObject equals whatever.
So when we call,
Okay,
so here we have a reference to that photo object that we got from the data manager, and we have a reference to the cell. So this is where we're going to call that. So cell dot photo object equals photo object, right? So that's the same as calling cell set photo object. Just calling the setter. The dot notation is calling the setter, and we're overriding that setter. Does that make sense? So this is kind of going
Yeah,
back
so
to
you're
what a property is.
Yeah, you're setting the property and the image view outlet in one.
Sorry?
You've just made the setter. You're setting the photo object property
Yes.
and the image view's image in one.
Yeah, so when I set this property from here, so I have this data object here
Yeah.
that I got from the data manager, and when I set it on the cell's photo object property, right, that calls the setter method, so it's calling set data object, or set photo object, and what I'm doing is, when that thing calls that method, I'm intercepting the call and setting the outlet right there.
Can I see the photo cell? Photo object. Oh.
Okay, so this is just basically one of the reasons you have setters on properties is so that you can intercept the call when it's being set, so that you can intercept the call and do something with it. In this case, we're setting an outlet with it. Okay, and this thing is like this cell's job is to manage its outlets, right? So it's kind of like, it's sort of meddling in the cell to get the self or row to reach in and set the outlets. Although in this case, it wouldn't cause an error. But it's it's bad. Not great practice, right, to do
So
that.
what is the benefit other than just best practice that?
What is the benefit? So if we were to make changes, so imagine if we just exposed a bunch of outlets on the cell, and then we changed something on those outlets, right? Then there would be changes those changes would have to be handled in cell for row, as opposed to just kind of limiting them to the cell itself. So it's like how we're sort of spreading out change, like the cell for a row. Like the view controller doesn't really need to have knowledge of what's happening with that data on the cell, right? And if we make it know about that, then when there's changes, those changes, like breaking changes, those changes will spread to the view controller when they really should just be isolated to the cell itself.
Okay.
So imagine if you have when you start building way more complex apps, if you build them in a modular way where you kind of don't spread knowledge of stuff that doesn't need to be there, like it doesn't give you any advantage, but it just has a disadvantage. And so if you keep adding up disadvantages, eventually you're going to get, that. So sort of like try to kind of look ahead so you're living in the future there. Don't live too much in the future, but
Just the
a little bit, where it's yeah.
So should we be doing this with all our outlets in a cell? Like this is the way to do it?
I would suggest yeah, it's best practice.
Do you have a final version of yesterday's assignment that we all did? Because
What was yesterday's
the table view one? Just like how you would model it.
And we do.
Yeah, the redo.
I don't have it, but I'm happy to look at your stuff if you
Yeah,
want.
because I
feedback.
feel like I did a little different than this, and I just want to know.
Yeah.
How to go about
Well, the thing is that one of the things is that for the quiz, like whatever way, like you're going to be asked to do a table view, whatever way you can do it simply is fine. Like you don't need to build a big data model or whatever. But I'm taking the opportunity to, as an instructor, to show you that you can actually structure your model so that it knows how to handle requests from the data source method. And the thing is that the way that they're asking you to do that is actually just using the manager pattern, which is what we've been doing anyway. And it's kind of like best practice for how to structure a model. So they're kind of like, they're asking you to, in a sense, they're kind of, in a sense, encouraging you to build it the right way by the way that they're asking the questions. So Apple's devious like that. They try to make you do things the right way, I think. Okay, so let's just, so at this point we have the cell with the data, so we can just return the cell. All right, so that's that. Let's see. So let's see. We should be able to see some data at this point. So let's run it. And we can't see any data. And the reason, let's see what the reason is. Oh, I know what the reason. So we haven't hooked up our data source or delegate yet. So we should do that. So there's two ways to do that. You can do it programmatically. So we could do it like self.collectionView. So first of all, like one way when you've kind of done all this stuff and you don't see any data, one of the things that you can do is put a breakpoint in like one of these methods that's getting the count, so number of sections in CollectionView. So if I put a breakpoint there and that never gets hit, then I know that there must be a problem with like either I haven't given an identity to something, or the outlet to the CollectionView isn't set up, or the data source isn't connected up. So if I just run that, you'll see that it never gets hit, right? So I'm just going to control drag up to here and just hook up the data source. and I could have done it in code here, just using self.collectionView.data source equals self. So I could have done it like that.
Are you making a delegate while we do this?
I'm just going to leave it for now because we'll see if we get there. So you can see it's now being hit. And so we're seeing our data there. So let's see. Looks fine. I think the images look a little distorted, but let me just see if there's something. So one of the things that you can do here is if you just select an image, so let's select the cell in the image view, and we can just pick like any old image, and then that way we can see if it's kind of distorting it. And I usually leave it to aspect fill. And then you want to also clip to bounds, set clip to bounds as well. Clip to bounds, yeah. Usually you want that because you don't want it spilling out over the sides. Okay, so let's fix this layout. We want it to be like taking up half the screen and so on. So let's fix that quickly. So this is pretty easy to fix. We do self.view. I guess we can do .frame, .size, .width. So we want the width, and we want to divide it by 2. So this is going to be a CG float. It's going to be width. So what we want is we need a reference to the flow layout object to interact with this. So we can do self.collectionView. If you start typing layout, you can see that we're not getting anything. So
Collection flow layout?
collection, yeah, flow layout. So
View layout, sorry.
CollectionView Layout's the name of it. So we need to cast this to a UI collection view flow layout. All right, so, and then what we can do is dot item size. And this is expecting a CG size. So we can just make this right here. So CG size. CG size make is this method, and we're just going to pass in width.
CollectionView. CollectionView Layout.
So self.collectionView.collectionViewLayout will give us a UI collection view layout object, but we want to cast it to the flow layout. So that's automatically set for us in Storyboard. So in order to get the item size property, we need to cast it to the flow layout. Otherwise, it doesn't give us that. So you can see that I can set it once here, or what I could do is I could set myself up as the flow layout's delegate, and every time it called for the item size, I could return the size, but it's because I'm not doing anything dynamic here, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so let's just run that. We're running out of time, but let's see if I can wrap it in the next 30 minutes. Okay, so that's that. Let me just, the other thing is, like, I'd like to add sections. So, well, first of all, let's just quickly add I guess what we could do is quickly add this detail view controller. So I'm going to just control drag. I have to control drag from the cell. Oops. Control drag from the cell to show. And then the detail view controller, it's going to need a property for a photo object. So I'm going to do that.
So anything within the cell that you're clicking, is,
Anything, sorry?
like if you're clicking image view inside the cell, that you set the cell as the.
Yeah, so the cell, like, it's got an action on it that will allow us to it's going to allow us to go over there. It's a segue, so port, so photo object, and then what I want to do here is I have an outlet to the image view. You can see right here, I already set this. So what I can do is I can do self dot image view dot image equals self dot photo. Oh, I thought I made it photo. Oh, I just didn't finish it. So non-atomic photo object.
This is in H.
Yeah, this is an H. Okay, so self dot photo object dot image. Okay, so that's just setting that image there.
You put in the detail, you imported the photo object,
Yeah,
and
and
then in the detail view controller.m, you have an at class.
so I did an @sign class in .h and then imported into .m.
Okay.
Okay, so I need to just really quickly, I need to do a prepare for segue. And since this is my only segue, I'm not going to really worry about checking for an identity. I didn't even give it one, so I'm not going to worry about that. So what I can do is I can do segue dot destination view controller, and so that means I need to import the detail view controller. So let's just do detail view controller dvc equals and dvc dot photo object equals. So I need the photo object. So I actually need a reference to the sender, and that's going to be the cell. So sender is going to be, this should be a photo cell. Right, so I should be able to ask it for its index path. Photo cell. Index. Let's see. UI collection view cell. Actually, I think it's index path for selected items. So I need index path for cell here. So you can see that there's a method on CollectionView, index path for cell. So I can use that. So let's do self.collectionView index path for cell. And this is going to be the sender, which is the sender is a UI CollectionView cell. So I can just do, I'm going to need to cast it to a UI CollectionView cell here. And let's see, it will know, should be able to handle that. So let's see, missing something here. Sender, self.collectionView index path for cell. So let's just do this in another line. So let's do UI collection view cell. So cell is it should be sender. So it doesn't need a bracket there, yeah, and also a bracket there. Okay, so then I can just pass in the cell. Collection view, self.collection view. Oh, right. So this is just giving me the index path. So I need to do So, sorry, it's one more step here. So this is an NS index path. And I need to ask the manager, self.manager, self.manager, data for item and index path. So I'll just pass it the index path. So I already wrote this method. And this is going to give us a photo object. And we can send that to the detail view controller. So DVC dot photo object equals photo object. Shit. Okay, that should work. Sorry, I was a little fast, but okay, so that's working. So let's just see. Notice how it does that little slidey thing. So we just need to fix that by going clip to bounds on the image. So clip to bounds on that image. Let's see. Okay, so let's just quickly do the, I want to do the headers. So, okay, so I want to do the section headers. Okay, so everyone cool?
Cool.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay, so let's go quickly here into the this. Let's select the collection view, and if we click on this little button here, we can do a section header, and that's just going to add that section header. And what we want to do is we want to populate this. So we need a custom class to control this. So this is the class is UI. Hang on, I always forget this. UICollectionViewCell is a subclass of UICollectionView reusable view. So UICollectionView reusable view. So it's this one. Okay, so let's just call this header view. Create that. Okay, so that's going to be the class that controls that cell. Okay, so select it, go to its identity, and it was header cell, header view. Okay, so let's do a couple things here. UI view. Okay, and I'm just going to drag that out and pin this thing. 0.
what did we put in there?
I put a view, and I'm going to give it a color of black. So
He's going to dev speak, so I'm stuck.
let's just make it black. Okay, and let's do a UI label.
Are we just hitting it 000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I'm dragging out a label, and I want to make this label, the color of the label I want to be white. So let's change the text of that to white. And we can align this to the center there. I'm not going to adjust the fonts or whatever. You can do that yourself. So inside, so basically the header view, we're going to do a very similar way to the way that we did the cell, except that we're going to do it with a musician object, right? Because the musician object is the one that controls the cell. It's the one that is relevant to the header cell, right? So I'm going to do an @sign class here. So this is going to be a musician, import musician.h. Okay, so this is going to have a property. Sometimes autocomplete stops. Property. So musician. Sorry, non-atomic. Musician And let's just,
What was that property?
it's just a musician property, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to override set musician. But we need an outlet to that label, so at sign interface, header view. Okay, let's get an outlet to that thing quickly. So it's right there is the outlet to the, let me just close this off. Right, so I'll just call that label.
That's in .m here.
This is in the .m of the interface, and then
Sorry, that's for the view.
this is the header cell view, header view. I called it. Should I call it?
Did you make a outlet for the view as well?
Nope.
No.
No outlet for the view. Yeah, you don't need it. So here I'm just going to do self.label dot text equals musician. So that's the passed in musician dot name. I'm just going to set the name to it. Okay, so that's exactly the same pattern that we used for the custom cell. So let's go into the MainViewController here. So now what we need is
Sorry, what was that last line? I forget the pattern.
yeah. So you're just assigning to the label text to the passed in musician. Okay, so here we want to return UI collection reusable view, and we want to do collection view. It's this long method here, and it's expecting this reusable view, and we've got a custom one, so same pattern. So import, and then it's header view. So we're going to do header view equals, and then we're going to do collection view DQ reusable supplementary view of kind with reuse identifier. So we need a reuse identifier over there on that guy. So let's select the cell again, make sure we have the header view cell selected. And I'm setting this to cell.
You already have one that's called cell.
That's not a reuse, a supplementary view, so they don't conflict. Yeah. Only if it's a prototype cell is it a problem. Okay, so supplementary view of kind. So I have the reuse identifier. I'm just going to call it cell. And we know what this is. This is just index path. And so I need this supplementary view of kind. So I'm just going to start typing UI collection, UI collection. Supplementary kind, ours is header. Okay, so that's going to give us a reference to that guy. So now we need musician object, right? So we have an index path. So let's look over at the data manager. We have never returned a musician from anything, so we're going to have to set that up. Oh, actually we never returned a musician, but we do have an @sign musician.
This is in
Okay.
Music Manager?
Yeah, so in the music manager, I'm going to ask for musician object at index path. So
Did you add something to the musician today?
not yet. I will in a sec. M, so equals, so self dot manager. So let's say, well, over here I said data for item and index path. I should have said photo data or something. So let's do musician, musician at index path, index path. Okay, so let me just implement this on the data manager. Okay, and this is going to return a musician. And it takes an NS index path. Index path. Okay, and this is a very easy method. So we just need to get the section from the index path. So index path dot section. and just do self.musicianArray. Oops. Sorry about that. Come on. Okay, and we just want to return this expression. So it's just going to ask you musician array for the index path dot section. All right, so good. So that's that. So now we need to do header view dot photo object or dot musician equals musician. Equals M. And then we want to just return the header view. Okay, let's try and run that.
Dang.
Yeah. Fire hose is.
Okay. So there we go. And if we click, we. So that's using the headers. We already set everything up for the headers, right, with the data source and everything. So because we had the musician object handle the name, which is like what it should be managing, right? It should be managing the name because it's a musician. They have a name. They have an array of photos. So all we need to do, if we set up the data model correctly, we can easily ask for more and more information. So one thing is that all of this stuff is kind of like stuff that shouldn't be in the view controller in any case. So, and we're already asking the data manager to do all this stuff. Why don't we just make the data manager the data source, and then we omit that. So let me just, shall I quickly do this?
Mm-hmm.
Switch it over? Okay. So yeah.
I think the way that we set it up, calling the manager to do all that stuff was the most confusing part to look at. If you just did it all there and it's just calling itself.
Okay, so that's fine. So
Yeah.
let's do, let's say that this thing is going to be a UI collection view data source. Right? So it is now the data source. So let's do, so we need all these methods. So first of all, let's do self.manager equals we need to disconnect the data source from this guy. So we need to disconnect the data source from the collection view. So that would be the first thing. And then we need to set the manager as the data source. So self.collectionView.dataSource equals self.manager. Like that. So now the manager is the data source. And so we can just move these methods. Well, actually this method as well. Just move this method. And also this.
So you said the CollectionView.dataSource is self.manager? Right?
Yeah, it's
Okay, so I'm going to copy this data source method, and this is also happening on. This is also a data source method, so that's also going to come in a sec. So let's just go over to the data manager, and let's. I guess this is going to be a little bit more complex. Okay, yeah, this is going to be a little bit more complex, but
We get the idea.
let's cut.
we just remove self.manager and call those functions. I don't know. Yeah.
Well,
That would
no,
be the
I
shortcut
could
fix.
just leave it as self. I mean, the easiest way is like this, right?
Can't you just edit it in scope?
But hang on.
No, it's 'cause he's done- those
Sorry, do
functions
that.
are calling
No, this
other
is
functions.
all I need to do is just grab this function now, right here. So I can just grab this,
So
and
do we have to import the cell?
we will. Yeah, we're gonna have to import the cell. Yeah. So here, I'm just gonna grab this method right. Oh, hang on. So the next method is number of sections. So that is number of sections in collection view.
I think you just put the wrong one up there. You just deleted that one, right?
I don't know why that's there. Number of sections. So it's just this method.
So we can, on the main view controller, we can get rid of number of sections, number of items, and the self-item at index value?
Yeah. Okay, so this is self a row here. So I'm going to need the photo cell, obviously, like your photo cell. So that should solve that problem. So here, instead of calling the manager in this line here, data for item at index path, so that's this method. So I can just do this directly here. So it's right here. This line right here, I just need to remove that. Okay, and photo object, so that works. So number of items in section, number of sections. So number of items in section is, for some reason, I don't know why that's messed up. Let me just go back and get it from the MainViewController. Number of sections, so number of, I don't know where my number of items in section is. Collection view, number of items in section is right here. Let's see. Yeah, so here we go. Okay, so self.number of items in section is calling into the manager with the section. Musician unindexed. I'm not sure what's going on here, but let's just do it. So number of items in section. So this is just self.return self.musician array section dot number of items in that section. So then it's dot photo object array dot count. So like that. What's the problem?
And you conform to the.
I have a duplicate method. So number collection view number of items. Oh, I did it here too. So
What did you
sorry about
replace
that.
with the section in that?
I'm sorry. So that looks good. So I just need to data item. Okay, hang on. We're almost done. We're almost done.
I'm deleting the
It'll be a straight count.
number of sections.
So number of items in section. So those two methods, that method is gone. So we just need this method now. So let's do that. Let's just move that method over to musician manager.m. Okay, and this needs a header view. So port header view. And self.manager, so musician at index. So this is just this method right here. So copy this. Oh, hang on. Index path is index path dot section. Index path dot section. So self dot. So here we need to do self dot musician array. That's fine. Actually, that works. There we go. That works. So get rid of that. Let's just clean up all this stuff so we don't need any of this stuff. There we go.
Yeah.
Prepare for segue is calling into, so data item for item. So there's one method in the data source that, let me just comment this. Let me just comment out the prepare for segue just to get it working.
It is not.
Okay, so now it's working with the data manager as the data source. Okay, so that's, I just have to get prepare for segue working because there's one method here where I call the manager for data source for item. So I just need to make sure that's working. I think it was this method right here. So data source for item. I think I might have deleted it. Data source. It's right here. So
Yeah. That's not good.
data source for item and index path. So this is expecting a photo object. So photo object equals self dot musician array index path dot section, and this is expecting a photo object. So it's dot photo object, and then this is index path dot item, and just return that. So that should work now.
That's what I'm saying. You guys can do it.
What?
Okay, so there it goes. It's working. So that's how to make an external an external data source method, which is really the preferred kind of way of doing it. Okay. So that. Well, you can for your test, it's okay to put the data source inside the view controller. It's not. I'm not going to care about that. So we just need to remove the data source, so we're no longer a data source. And that's it. So now you can see that the view controller, all it does is set up the data source and then handles the segue. And also, so everything like data source related is like actually a separate object. I mean, that's why they give you the option of assigning a data source. That's like a place where you can separate concerns, and that's the best way to do it. But for the test, don't worry about it. Like, you might not have time, so don't worry about getting that part right. It's okay if you put the data source methods right in the view controller. But obviously, when you start getting more complex projects, you don't want to have like these massive view controllers with handling data source methods and also delegate methods and everything in there.
Is there going to be anything in regards to scroll views on the test?
No, whole views. No.
For collection views, it's just the table view.
It'll be the table view, and for the rewrite, we usually do a collection view for the rewrite. So but in terms of like what you need to know, it's the same. It's going to be the same info you need to know for both. Like, we're not asking you to do anything with the layout object or anything like that.
Cool.
Yeah.